So welcome to our panel about rethinking security. As Letha said, this discussion brings two members of the 2022 N-Square Innovation Network Fellows Program to share some conversations that they've been having for the last 6 months about how we might rethink security in a world very different from the one we live in now. One in which, as Letha said, perhaps we no longer need to rely on our national and international security on nuclear weapons, and one in which we've had to radically reimagine the tenets of how we think about what it is to be secure and how we can work to try to guarantee common, planetary, and human security. As Letha said, and I want to recognize, although our time here on stage is short, this clock is ticking, we'd love to join you to have us come part of the conversation over the course of your time here. And you can do that by kind of catching us after the panel, maybe going for a walk in one of the interactive sessions this afternoon. You can do that also by reaching out to the larger N-Square PopTech community. So here in the audience, as Letha said, are about like 20 N-Squareers/PopTechers. We've got Erica Gregory and Morgan Matthews from N-Square. We have collaborators from the Nuclear Threat Initiative, from Global Zero, from the New American Foundation, and a variety of other organizations that have been instrumental in this collaboration, as well as about a dozen current and past cohort members of prior fellowships and current fellowships, who I'll just ask to raise their hands, because there's a lot, if you look around the room. So we'll be plenty of opportunities to keep talking about this, and we hope to be able to do that with you. I guess what I'm going to do here, my job, is to introduce the panelists and let them share with you some of their perspectives on the changing face of security in light of this imaginative leap forward, and what it might mean for us in terms of how we understand and think about security, and what that even means in both this century and the next one. So let's get started. So I'm first going to introduce Brian Novoselich. Brian's a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army and the director of strategic plans and assessment at West Point.
So
hold on, I haven't introduced you yet. I've only named your titles. Brian, could you describe the situation that, as you see it, that we find ourselves in now, and a situation that demands change?
Absolutely. Thanks, Charlie. And before I get started, I just want to say I feel it's a privilege to be here sitting on the stage, sharing the stage with Kiki and Charlie and the rest of the PopTech community. It's just a great community to instigate change, and I'm just super glad to be a part of it. And thanks to N-Square for allowing us to be up here today to reimagine security. So let me get started with the Trump administration, who first acknowledged, and now the Biden administration has expanded this concept that the United States is now in an age of persistent competition. So what this means is we're acknowledging the fact that our global adversaries are working below the level of armed conflict to reach their national objectives. So what does that mean in practice? So we see this spider webbing of activities that are creating threats in ways that we have not imagined previously. So you think about disruption of our domestic governmental processes. You think about persistent cyber threats to our national infrastructure. You think about the degradation of trust in our institutions, and really, fundamentally a degradation in our trust in truth as we start to weaponize information. So if you stack on top of that some emerging trends that will be accelerating over time that are stressing our national and international systems, like climate change that is rendering parts of the globe uninhabitable. You think about ecological degradation that's leading to food insecurity, the mass migrations that result. If you look at the Ukraine right now, you see the weaponizations of the basics of human need, like energy and food. And so protracted over time, these threats really have the potential to break our systems, right? So what I think we need is a reimagining of what it means to secure the globe. In working through these threats, you're starting to see some questioning of the global order that we've been talking about for decades. And so if you look at the 2022 National Security Strategy that was just published earlier this month, it recognizes that the US needs to be a global leader in countering these transnational threats. So you think in terms of climate change, food insecurity, energy shortages, and communicable diseases, that's becoming front and center in the national, international security conversation. And in the words of the Biden administration, if parents can't feed their children, nothing else matters. So for me, who spent over 2 decades on the pointy end of national security, it gives me pause to reimagine or rethink what my conceptualizations of security have been. I think we're at a decade that's going to be pivotal for the global order, and we're at a global inflection point. And so if you look at Ukraine, you see the questioning of the previous thoughts about this global order built on mutual trust and cooperation. And you see we're having conversations about the next Cold War, about rigid blocks around the globe. And so that creates some concern. So what's our path forward? I think our path forward is that we need to enable nations to work towards their own self-interests by mitigating some of these transnational threats. And in doing so, if they become more resilient, it elevates their agency on the world stage and gives us the ability to have different conversations. And so for me, national security has historically been keeping bad guys from doing bad things. And what I think moving forward is we need to think about enabling good people to do great things in a sustainable way, and how that enters into the conversation about global security. And so with that, Charlie, I turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Brian. So I'm going to then turn it over to Nyagh. Kiki is a technologist and developer and currently an industrial design practitioner who's working at the Rhode Island School of Design on a research project that is looking at civic engagement, civic hygiene, and civic education. And Kiki, I'm going to look to you to ask if you could share with us some of the features of a new security framework that you see emerging when we look around the globe.
So, unlike Brian, I am a person who's not been socially entrained in the system. I've worked as a developer and as a freelancer for most of my career, and I'm deepening my practice at the Rhode Island School of Design. And I'm user-centered, so I look at humans, I look at how people interact with objects, with systems, and really investigate how the end users are facilitated and uplifted through the system. And the system has been failing people, as we've seen. And so when I come into this conversation, I'm really thinking about how do we let great people do great things, and how have systems inhibited this process. And so, in my research through Mode Yellow 5, which I'm wearing my colors today, I've been really investigating the frictions that people face in participation and why people are feeling as if they're not being heard. Common feedback is, I don't matter. And how do we produce systemic changes when people feel like the system doesn't belong to them, and or that entering the system has so many constraints that it is actually unhealthy. And that's part of the conversation of civic hygiene that I'm developing, is how do we create systems that are healthy enough to participate in? So when thinking about, going back to the idea, letting great people do great things, I feel like one factor that I'm learning about in our national security model and foreign affairs models that isn't really discussed deeply is that people have been doing great things. And our society is predicated on a Western perspective on what great things are, and that leaves out a lot of voices. And specifically, as we look towards models that come out of the global South, areas of the world that have not been elevated as having voice and as having power of consciousness to facilitate change and to create balance. When will we create systems that integrate these knowledge systems that are millennia age deep? And how do we make sure that when we're creating a new global order, that the systems that have been keeping this earth safe for a long time are started to have weight in order. And what is the weight of order, and how do we start reestablishing a global north that has given space to a global south that has been taking the burden of our toxic offshoots, that's been constantly dealing with having their voices not being heard, and reorient the system so that we can start doing the work collectively that is going to ensure that we can stay here. Because a lot of us love being on Earth. and so, like, as we, for me, as I'm learning about these systems and how, high thought from a government level is facilitating, space for all of us, I really think the question that I am constantly being brought back to is, when do the voices of the youth matter? Like, as a millennial myself and being in spaces with millennials and Gen Zers, like Earth consciousness, social justice, and all of these other artifacts that have been constantly put towards the back burner in our social consciousness are now becoming the very essence of what security looks like. I'm also understanding that there's room for our larger systems to start surfacing those outputs so that our security systems are holistic, they are user-focused, and they reorient us around people's experiences, and also anchoring on the fact that there's been a lot of destruction, there's been a lot of removal of presence, a lot of memories and experiences lost intentionally, and bringing us back to how do we repair all of that so that our system, as we move forward, is really addressing a reparative model, and part of repairing people will also repair this earth. And so, yeah, it's been a very interesting conversation, but I'm really, like Brian, I'm very hopeful that as soon as we make a table where there's equal footing and that all voices can be there, we will be quickly on the pathway towards healing, sustainability, and uplifting all people.
Thank you. We have a little bit of time left, so I'd like to kind of come back. And Kiki, I think first I'd like to ask you, where are you looking for models of that kind of new reparative and restorative framework?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of conversations about what's happening in different nodes of the planet. And I find that what's happening in Rwanda and Vietnam, ecologically and socially, are really good hallmarks of what can come out of a reparative model. I think the shift towards environmental consciousness, green technology, and sustainable futures is something that we can all draw on to think about what's next.
And Brian, I'll hand it over to you.
So I think, agree with you, Kiki. And so where I think we need to go in the future as we look at, global leadership and how this all gets put together is maybe amplifying those nodes by intermingling them in a conflict mitigation framework. If we can point to these different nodes, put them together and synthesize them in a way that amplifies the ability to proceed, I think that just creates a stronger model moving forward and just raises a level of agency around the world to have a say in where the globe goes in the future.
Yeah, and then how creating agency reduces competition and hopefully saves the world.
Hopefully.
So I want to thank you both for being willing to share with a bunch of friendly strangers, soon to be friends, but a bunch of friendly strangers, a conversation that you've been having with each other for the last 6 months. And I want to thank N-Square and PopTech for constructing platforms like the N-Square Fellowship to bring new voices and new perspectives into the nuclear and sort of larger planetary security fields to hopefully help reinvigorate the conversations and the models that we're looking at and developing. And of course, I want to thank you all.